What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is an experienced executive who has a history of driving brands to success. He's a skilled hospitality pro who knows the secrets to pulling off a successful project. He's the head of development for Ashford Incorporated, and he's the CEO at Premier, a subsidiary of Ashford. Ladies and gentlemen, Hector Sanchez. Welcome, Hector.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Thanks a lot for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I just wanted to kind of tee up the origin story of how we came to be at this moment. I've had one guest that I did 2 full interviews with. It was like a repeat, and I hope to do it more because as the industry has changed and things change and the landscape and the customers and the guests and everything is always in flux, it's nice to do a check-in, and I've been doing this for 2 years. But Chris Green was an early guest, and I really enjoyed having him so much. And then the pandemic and Chesapeake getting acquired by Remington and that whole merger, it was a really interesting story. So I wanted to have him on next. And by way of that, I found you, and I'd love to get into sharing with everyone how all of those parts kind of intermix. But I just want to say thank you for coming and being a part of this to let us all know about who you are and why you do what you do. But thank you.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely, Dan.
Because I think this will be a great thread. I asked one question of everyone, which is, what does hospitality mean to you, or how do you define hospitality, Hector? And let's use that as a point of departure because, you know, Ashford is a hospitality company and all of the arms underneath it and subsidiaries are. So, but for you on a personal level, Hector, how do you define hospitality?
I think it's about serving people, right? It's about serving people and creating experiences, very unique experiences for people. You know, something that they can create an experience that they can go back and talk to their friends about, their family about. It's really about that.
I love that. And again, what I found in all these conversations, there's no right or wrong answer, but around that idea of service and a unique experience or something experiential, that really resonates and hits home and comes up a lot. And I think that's actually a great departure in the sense that for what you and your whole team at Premier does, I think that you guys are unique within our industry because you do project management, you do design, you do procurement, you do all those things that can help a developer or an owner, either under the umbrella of Ashford or other, have an idea, come up with a concept, and really execute. And I think that that's pretty unique, especially with the scale of what Ashford brings to the table, but also everyone else out there. So tell us a little bit about what makes you and your team at Premier unique.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I would add to the 3 list of services that you offered, we also have architecture.
Cool.
Right? I believe we have about 16, maybe 17 architects on staff. These are people that are licensed in almost every state in the U.S. So very, very experienced people. So yeah, like you mentioned, right? We have interior designs, we have architects, project managers, construction managers. We also have procurement folks, right? We have an engineering team. We have we also have a contracts team.
Wow.
Right? So we have a heck of a lot more resources than most companies do, really out of necessity, right? Because as you mentioned, because we're part of the ownership, right, of an ownership group that owns 117 hotels, you end up needing quite a bit of staff to be able to work on all these different projects. And yeah, so we have all of that in house. We make that readily available to all of the third-party clients that we work with, you know, in addition, of course, to taking care of all of the Ashford properties as well. So I think that's one of the things that probably makes us very unique. In addition to that, I would say specifically in the project management side, we have, I believe we have probably 33 or 34 people in the just in our project management team. And within that team, we have a very diverse experience. So we have a team within that team that I'm going to call them, that's our kind of ground up and redevelopment experts. So on that team, everyone that's on that team is what I call a recovering architect, right? So these are architects, licensed architects that have decided to go into the project management world, which is very, very helpful. Then we have another side of it where we have a lot of construction manager experience, people that came from general contractors, people that were superintendents, which gives us the ability, and this is where I think is very unique, gives us ability when you have a project and you have certain issues on projects, it gives us the ability in-house to go in and potentially replace the general contractor if there's too many issues, which, as you know, Dan, it's very, very costly to do it mid project, right? You go and you try to hire another general contractor to replace the one you currently have. It's very expensive because you're having them take on the liabilities of what the other general contractor did. So it ends up being a heck of a lot more expensive. We have, unfortunately, have had to do that in a number of occasions where we've come in to take over projects midway.
So that's actually a really, to go on to, like when you were defining your idea of hospitality, this kind of unique experience. And I've always found whenever I speak to people who are more on the construction side or like the actual opening of the hotel, we're in hospitality, we are, but we also have to drive to get it done, right? So, and I think that's really interesting that you can take over a relationship when it's gone sour and still keep it going. But how do you balance that so that your clients, your stakeholders, whether it's Ashford or outside, and does that happen when you do that? Is that mostly with outside clients or from within Ashford, first of all? And second of all, from a hospitality perspective, how do you make sure that everyone's still having a positive experience, even though you're just like, oh shit, what just happened? We got to get back on track.
I think to answer your first question, the answer is yes. It's both, right? It's for Ashford and third-party clients. And to answer your second question, I have so I don't know if you remember this, Dan, but I actually came from the oil and gas industry, right? And that's my background. I was there for 17 years. I've now been in the hospitality industry for about 3.5 years. And, I feel that the best relationships I have built with customers throughout my career has been actually when things have gone bad, right? It's you're always going to have issues on projects. To me, it's just about how do you react to those issues? Do you just hide from them? Do you ignore the calls? Or do you rise up and it's kind of all hands on deck? And that's really, I think that's what we're about, right? We're going to own it. We're not going to point fingers. We're going to do whatever we possibly can to make it right, right? Even though many times, and a lot of times it's not even technically our fault, but if there's something within the resources that we have, either at Premier and or Ashford, which I've done both, is I will pull on them and I will make sure that we put our best resources to this. So I think the customers really appreciate that. I think clients really appreciate the way we own things. We had a situation where one client here a while back where, the GC didn't do what they were supposed to do. They started getting back on track. We had, our senior vice president, a few directors, project managers on site the next day.
Yeah.
Right. And this was, in a different state in the Northeast. So we do that. I think we tend to own things the way very few people do. And I think it's also because we're also owners of hotels ultimately, or part of an ownership company.
I think so something that's resonating with me here is that, okay, so I provide custom furniture to hotels and resorts all over the place with a company called Bermanfalk. When I talk to people in the residential world who provide to retailers, big box or smaller through dealers, if things are late, they'll have a residential client who's like, oh, okay, well, it'll be another 6 or 12 weeks before I get that $12,000 sofa or whatever they wanted in their house. But it's interesting. I think what makes what we do in the hotel side, and also from your oil and gas experience, actually, this is what made me think of this, is if that hotel doesn't open, it really affects the financial performance of an asset. And while we're not saving lives, right? We're not saving lives. It really affects a whole bunch of stakeholders and community and locales. So I call that when things do go sideways, I think one of the things that's helped us be successful, and what I'm hearing you is, I call it entering the danger, right? It's like that uncomfortable conversation that no one wants to have, but it's like being the first one to say, look, we have a problem. We all had a role in it. Maybe mine was a little bit more than yours or a different way, but let's come up with a solution. Can you share an experience of it, whether from your former life in oil and gas or current life in hospitality, where you may have been resistant to wanting to have that uncomfortable conversation because of the stakeholders, but then you're like, you know what? This is going to help us build a relationship and shine, like you said earlier, when things go wrong.
One of the ones that comes to mind for me. So in 2013, they moved me, and I'll mention one about oil and gas, and I can mention one about hospitality. In 2013, they moved me and my wife to Mexico. Right when I was in oil and gas, I worked for this big national company and multinational company, and they moved me to oil and gas. They moved me down to Mexico to run our Mexico and Central America operation. So eventually, I became the area manager, country manager for those for a few of those countries down there. And I remember we had an issue on an offshore rig with PEMEX. Right, PEMEX is the oil and gas company, the national oil company of Mexico. And there was an offshore rig. We had an issue with one of the tools that we had on site. Long story short, the tool didn't open. And offshore rigs, they're expensive.
Yeah.
Every day that you're down, it could be $250,000 a day to $1 million cost a day that you're down on that rig and you're not able to continue. We had an issue. So I won't mention the company's name. So in Mexico, I was at National Oil Varco. Our contracts weren't directly with PEMEX because we weren't a service provider. We're just a tool provider. So we would always have to go through these contracts of these big service companies like Schlumberger or Halliburton or one of those big companies. And the main guy in PEMEX called a meeting for Saturday morning, right, in Villahermosa. And, we were at fault, even though we weren't completely at fault. There was definitely something that we had at fault. And I remember going into that meeting, I was like, oh, this is not going to be fun, right? This is not going to be a fun conversation. His rig's been down for a few days. And I remember going in there and he looks at me like, okay, like we have this too. What do you have to say? Right. And they wanted to see the main guy in Mexico, which for that company it was myself. And I said, look, we screwed up. I said, this is what happened. So I started telling them, I said, look, we take responsibility. And these are the things that we're going to do to make sure we no longer have this issue. So right at that moment, he looks at me and then he looks at the service provider that was there and he starts going off on them. And he tells them, bleep, bleep, bleep. How many issues have you had? You have never came in my office and owned it the way he just did.
Yeah.
You have never come. You're always finger pointing at other people. You don't own anything. So it turned into he jumped all over them and just kind of let me just go on about our way. And we solved the issue and we came through and everything was great. So that was an interesting experience, So yeah, I just learned you just have to own things, and take ownership of things. Don't go around pointing the finger. Right. And just take the responsibility for what you've done and then put a plan forward on what you're going to do to fix it and to make sure it never happens again. And I learned that I learned that kind of earlier in my career, which I think has paid dividends.
And now do the same, but in your more recent experience of hospitality, what's an example of that where you've kind of owned it and then everyone is for the better at the end of it?
There was a situation with one of our customers, one of the big REITs. It wasn't Ashford. It was a different REIT. And there was some issues with a general contractor that we were working on. I won't name them. We no longer do any work with them. We'll say that. and there was an issue with the general contractor, and I remember the main guy, from that REIT, was on a call, and it was, I believe it was like a Thursday night, Wednesday night, or something like that, and and we're having a video call, kind of like we are right now, and him and I and my team were the only ones on video, right? And the general contractor was not on video, right? He was kind of, so, and we weren't pointing fingers. We were stating the facts and trying to come up with solutions. And the gentleman, the main guy at that REIT, got very upset because his thought was, here's the CEO of this company. He is on a call. It was like 9-10 at night. I don't remember. It was super late. I'm on a call. I jumped within, he told me like 20 minutes before if I could jump on a call. I said, absolutely. And I made sure that my team was on that call. And these guys, one of them, the main guy over there, the CEO, wouldn't even bother. He was out at dinner or something. He wouldn't bother to call. And I literally dropped everything that I was doing to make sure that we addressed the issues that were happening. And it was the one that I told you, the next, no, actually that morning already, we had our senior vice president, or project manager, we had our director, we had our project managers. So it was kind of all hands on deck from our side. Even though that project didn't go well, the client came back and gave us more work.
Yeah.
Right. Because he understood these guys own it, right? Things are going to happen. They always do in every single job. But we really owned it, and we ended up getting more work out of it, even though it wasn't our best moment.
Yeah. And for you to share and be vulnerable with them, like, hey, this isn't our best moment, but this is what we're going to do. I always, for a little while before the pandemic, I started getting into some jujitsu. I started practicing doing that stuff. And what was really cool about it, what I love, is you knew you were in a good spot when there was no space between you and your opponent, right? You knew exactly where you were. And I find that is also in difficult situations, it's like running at the danger. You're eliminating all space and all misunderstanding. And it requires some vulnerability on our parts, but also understanding on the client's parts. But the sooner we can get to the place where there's no space, I think we're all for the better for it, because then we can all, there's no misunderstandings, there's no inference, and then we can all plot a course forward, right, to get out of that unfortunate circumstance like you shared. So if we were to just step back, and now let's look at oil and gas and hospitality, two very different industries, but also financial assets, right? And schedule and time matter. In making this transition, what do you appreciate the most about hospitality? Like, why are you glad you made that decision to where you are now?
Dan, I had a very, I'll tell you why I initially made the decision, and I'll tell you that I'm still extremely happy and excited that, that I made the decision to transfer over. The reason I made the decision, so they reached out to me about the job, and initially, and I wasn't looking at leaving oil and gas. I'd been there my entire career, and I had a very good role where I was. They reached out to me, and my initial thought was, I'm an oil and gas guy. Like, what in the world am I going to go do in hospitality? And the more and more I talked to them about the opportunity, and not even the opportunity, but some of the challenges, and really, and what they really needed out of this role, I realized, well, it's actually been exactly the same thing I've been doing for my career for at least a good 10 years. And, what kind of sold me on it is I had a very unique experience during my interviewing process, where I interviewed with some of the folks that would eventually report to me, right? One of those people was Carla Niemann, which is my SVP of interior design. Another one was Johannes Michalsky, which was our senior vice president of project management. We've not promoted him over all of operations. And then another one was Mike Funk. He was over contracts, and now he's over contracts and engineering. And I'll tell you what, Dan, people in oil and gas like their job, right? People, ultimately, there's some people that like their job more than others. But seeing the passion that this team had when I was talking to them about their job, and albeit this is like April 2020, right? It is the middle of the pandemic. It couldn't get any worse. And you could still see the passion and the drive and the love that they had for this industry, where I told myself, I have to be a part of that. Like, that is just something, like, that you don't find everywhere. And to me, it was just that. And now fast forward to where I'm at now, I mean, that just proved out to be the case, right? Is people love what they do. They love serving people. They love creating experiences. People are a little nicer, or a lot nicer.
Yeah.
In
For those of you who are,
right? You would hope so.
for those of you who are just listening and not watching, like, I'm literally, as Hector's saying this, I'm smiling ear to ear, because I think what you just made a light bulb go off in my head of like why I'm doing this podcast. I think for within our industry, or just this idea of hospitality, it's so, nothing is easy, but it's so easy to get to that place where people light up and express their passion within our world. And I thank you. So you, that idea of proving it out, I didn't know what's keeping me doing this, but it's like, it's such a joy, and such like an exposed nerve of joy and passion, that it makes doing these conversations like an incredible, I don't know, I just find it so rewarding. But thank you for that.
No, it's amazing.
And I get to,
Yeah, no,
and I
absolutely.
get to learn from
Amazing.
others and change my perspective. So I really thank you for that, man.
Yep.
Okay, now I'm writing that down, because I'm also writing a book right now, and this will, thank you. So aside from being CEO at Premier, you're also head of development for Ashford, right?
That is correct.
So, and in that, you're putting deals together, you're finding debt, you're finding equity. Hopefully, I guess you would probably be using your team at Premier to help birth all of those projects, so to speak. But we're in a challenging inflationary interest rate. Like, there's a lot of headwinds right now. So tapping into that passion for you with all the headwinds coming at you, what keeps you getting up and doing that, and like lighting your fire for that, despite all the macro headwinds going on now?
Honestly, I know it's going to sound kind of cliche, but I really love it, right? I love a challenge, right? Coming from oil and gas, we have downturns over there every other year.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like, here is like every few years. I can deal with that all day long, right? I thrive in it. I like the competition of it. I think for us, we're in a very unique situation, right? As head of development for Ashford, because we have the two REITs, right? And the two REITs, one of them has a pretty good balance sheet. The other one does as well, but we're looking at doing some pay downs on some debt, etc. So we're a little bit more careful. But and we're also chasing a lot of deals that have public incentives, right? Whether call it tax increment financing or some type of historical tax credit deal that ultimately end up requiring a lot less equity. Mm-hmm. So we can go about it that way. And then we're also talking to external investors. But the nice thing about, being at a company like Ashford is typically, most GP partners or most GP, right? Most developers want to put in, 5-10% of the deal. The nice thing for us is we can afford to put quite a bit more than that, which gives equity investors a comfort level as well. Like, we have skin in the game as well. So yeah. And then on the debt side, it's the same thing on that side, right? As we have very strong relationships with a lot of, with a lot of lenders. There's a particular project right now that we're actually working on. We're redeveloping old historic building here in Fort Worth. And I remember the lender, on that, the senior lender on that, I remember he sent me a voicemail, and we've since become friends. We've had some issues on that one. And, the lender sent me, he called me and left me a voicemail, and then we went out to dinner and stuff. And he one of the things that he mentioned, he said, Hector, I've been doing this a long time. He said, the way your team at Premier and Ashford just really take ownership of things and you guys want to do what's right, he said it's very hard to find. So with that, we're already talking to him where a lot of other lenders are not making any loans on any future projects. We're talking to him about being a lender on some of our other projects as well that we're doing. And to me, it's a relationship thing.
Yeah.
Right. And you end up showing people, your true colors when things don't go well. And you end up building some very good relationships. People want to work with people they like and they trust.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Totally. And again, that like and the trust oftentimes comes out of those, I call them the crucibles of the whoopses or the, what are we going to do? And getting rid of that space between. As you are on your course now doing the development and also CEO of Premier, and you look at that team of, I think you said Carlos and Mike and all the other ones, but they were the ones that like you could tap into their passion, so to speak, right? Look with that passionate lens, what's exciting you most about what you're seeing out there in the future from the seat you're in now?
I think it's just our growth opportunities, right? I love building, I love growing. One of the things, Dan, that I haven't mentioned is, before I came in 2020, one of the main things that they wanted for me to do here at Premier was for us to grow our third-party business, right? We had never done any third-party business before. In 2019 and before, we have never done a single job third-party business. Everything was just for Ashford.
And then just for the listeners who don't know what third-party means, just give us a tweet, not a blog, on what a third-party project manager is.
Okay, so in more than a third-party project manager, I meant really a third-party ownership group.
Okay, third-party ownership.
Right.
Group,
yeah. So I was referring to, we used to just do things for our ownership group, and now we've gone to other customers outside of just that primary ownership group where we used to do 100% of our work. Right. So fast forward to where we're at now, where we had nothing. I think now we have over 80 contracts that we've signed in the last 3.5 years. So that's definitely exciting. We have an architecture team in-house as well. We had a very, very tiny, we had literally a couple of people that would help us do some drawings and some stuff when I came on board. Now we've brought over Patrick Burke. And he's quite a few of the team that he used to have at his own firm, ended up following him here as well. We have a development team that's ran by Rex Tullius. He was a president of another development firm. I think just our growth potential, as you know, Dan, as well, is, Ashford used to do 100% hotels. Well, now Premier started doing a bunch of multifamily work. We just acquired our first multifamily as an owner, multifamily property in San Antonio about 2 months ago. So we're looking at diversifying our portfolio. So to me, I feel like we're literally just scratching at the surface. And I feel like the opportunities are endless for Premier, right? Because we can do hotels. We're actually looking at doing self-storage and multifamily and potentially some light industrial, so we can continue to diversify and grow, and not just at Premier, but at the Ashford level as well.
So I've thought about this a lot. Like for me, mostly coming from the FF&E world, there's always, if a small ownership group wanted to renovate a hotel or acquire and reposition or build a new one, typically they hire all third-party people to get that done. And they're all stakeholders in the success of that project. But whereas Ashford, I think you said they have 117 hotels, or you have 117 hotels at the beginning. From your experience, as far as like an ideal customer, at what point would an ownership group, from a scale, like there's not many with 117 hotels in a portfolio, but there's some with 1 to 10, there's some with 10 to 20. Like at what point does it make sense to bring all of those elements or certain parts of those elements in-house? Like from a scale point of view, I always look at, like, if a hotel's renovating every 7 years, I did like some back of the envelope thing once where I was like, okay, well, if there's an ownership group that has 30 to maybe 50 hotels, they could support a team like that that's doing it. But then it's also taking them out of their specialization, which is owning financial assets or commercial real estate in the hotel segment. So like from your experience back of the envelope, or like at what point do you find that ownership groups would bring many of these functions inside?
I have not seen it personally. I haven't seen an ownership group that has done this. One, and then two, it's we're ultimately we're an independent company, right? Premier is a standalone independent company that is owned by Ashford Inc, right? And then the two REITs, Braemar Hotels and Resorts and Ashford Hospitality, are the one that actually own the hotels, right? But Ashford Inc just owns service companies, kind of like Remington Hospitality. But I have not seen I haven't seen any ownership group that has done what we've done. So I'm not sure when it actually makes sense to do that.
Yeah.
Dan.
Well, that's really interesting, because I've seen ownership groups that might have inside project management. They might have inside
They might
procurement.
have one or
general.
yeah.
But I've never seen it where all of them come together.
All these different. Yeah, I just haven't seen it either. What I have seen is that a lot of ownership groups, and some of the management companies as well, they'll have like, they do design and project management and some of these things, but then when you actually start like talking to them, it's a person over design that hires outside design firms, interior design firms, or a project manager. Sometimes they definitely do in-house project management, and when it exceeds when it exceeds their capacity, then they'll start hiring other project managers to help them out on some of the smaller projects. So I don't know when it actually makes sense to do that. I think project management is the one that comes to mind that might. Interior design, and as you well know, Dan, the brands have very specific requirements and approval process, et cetera, for you to go through that and for them to actually give 2 or 3 person team a lot of those approvals for all these different brand types. I think it gets a little bit complicated.
So then let's think of that as okay, so you have everyone in-house, and then if you're doing like a new independent hotel, you acquire it for yourselves, or you're doing it as a third party, and you have your own team of interior designers and architects and engineers, and you can execute all of that. Do you ever bring in what outside consultants do you ever bring in? I'm almost thinking like sometimes it's nice to get a branding company from outside that can look at it fresh and set up like the brand pillars and the goal, and then you guys can execute on that. Like how do you balance that to keep your product fresh, so to speak?
I think that is twofold. I think so we actually have quite a few conversions that we're doing right now, right? So we're converting Mr. C's in Beverly Hills to a Cameo. That's going to be a Hilton. We're converting in La Concha. We're converting that one to an Autograph. We're converting La Pave in New Orleans to a Tribute. So we've converted the Notary back in the day from a Courtyard, Notary in Philadelphia, from a Courtyard to an Autograph as well. So we have quite a bit of experience. However, we do know what we're good at and what we don't. To your point, for every single one of those projects, we've hired an outside branding firm, right? On those soft brands, we definitely hire an outside branding firm for those.
Yeah.
There's also we're converting an old office building in San Antonio to an Autograph as well. We've hired a branding firm there. That's actually a third party customer of ours. We have Carla Niemann, our interior design SVP. She's done a very good job in setting up her team in such a way, because Ashford owns, and we do all of that in-house. Ashford owns from Courtyards to Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah.
Right? Like right now we're doing the Ritz-Carlton in Tahoe.
Yeah, we're working with you on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. And then, we're also doing we're doing some townhomes at the Ritz-Carlton Lake Tahoe as well. We're doing some ground up townhomes, which hopefully will break ground here in May of this year. So we're doing all of that interior design in house. So some of the things that we'll hire consultants for, definitely landscape architects. We always hire a landscape architect for that. On the architecture side, before Patrick was here, we used to hire some architecture firms. For example, if we're working in St. Thomas, but he's done a very good job of getting licensed in quite a few of these other places that he wasn't already licensed in. So hopefully, we're moving forward, we won't hire a lot of outside architects. It's been painful working with some of these, honestly. Sometimes we'll hire F&B consultants, even though we have somebody here named Barbara Carlson. She's one of our vice presidents in interior design. She's kind of like the F&B person that we have here, but at times we might go outside.
I think it's interesting to get those, like, to freshen it up, because we're all good. Like, your whole team is really good at what they do. They're excellent at what they do. But because the marketplace and the consumer and all of the stakeholders are always evolving, whatever got us to where we are at this moment, it's not going to get us there. So there's other people who are always on that forward edge of experimenting with, from technology to design to materials to menus. And I've just been surprised over the past year, especially with a lot of the rise of the soft brands and the independents, how incredibly important a branding company is. Like, I might have just been blind to it, but to me, I think people are really starting to realize how they can really understand what the outcomes are and then establish a narrative and a story that they want to tell. And then architects, designers, landscape architects, F&B folks, it's almost like the song sheet that creates alignment, right? Yeah. It's really, I think it's a really cool development, and it's just really constantly honing the story that you want to tell and taking a constantly fresh perspective. Am I coming out of left field there, or are you seeing that as well?
No, absolutely. I think, I'll just mention, I think 1650, we do quite a bit of work with them. The gentleman out of California, they've done great.
Okay.
Right. They're kind of our go-to folks for most of these projects. But yeah, they've done an excellent job. Right.
And in oil and gas, you're not hiring a branding company to make a new rig, right?
No, we're hiring a branding company to give a product a new name. Yeah. That's about it.
Exactly. Okay, so then going with that, so in oil and gas, you're building refineries, you're building rigs, you're building just a lot of infrastructure projects, and there's a lot of zeros associated with them. In hospitality, you're building countless things as well, from restaurants to hotels to convention centers, whatever it may be. From like using that brand, the idea of a branding company, that's different between the two. What's another element of hospitality that you were surprised to find out that you really love, and like it's just a new experience for you from the idea of delivering hospitality and projects on time?
I would say everything. I remember, I give you an example. I remember, so I walked in here. It was probably my first weekend. And, and Carla comes in my office and she's like, hey, I think we should do something different with your office. I'm thinking we should do, what are your thoughts? And I'm like, look, Carla, I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. Give me a spreadsheet or I can talk to people. I am terrible. I couldn't even tell you if you should put, that sofa on that corner. Unless you put it there, then I'll have an opinion about it. So, she came in and she just did her thing. And, obviously I love it. I think what surprises me is the creativity. Like I was at the Renaissance Nashville here not that long ago. And it was a couple of weeks ago. I was at the Renaissance Nashville. We do these quarterly kind of a customer, investor, lender, and we have some people from the brand events that we do at Premier. And I was out there and I was walking through the lobby, and then I was also walking through the meeting space. And I just look at some of the things that they do. I'm like, you could literally give me 7,000 years to come up with this much of it. And I like, for example, they have a container there that you couldn't even tell it's a container till somebody tells you it's a container that they've converted into a bar.
Wow.
Right. And you open it up and it's a bar and it's beautiful. It has like this graffiti on it, but it's just like, how do people come up with that?
Yeah.
Like my brain, I'm just not built that way, So I think that has definitely been, I think that's just been, yeah. Like I also pay a lot more attention to details on certain things when I go to hotels, which I used to never, right? I usually have my blinders on. I just walk and I just go on about my way, and I do that when I go home, right? And then I'm looking for a store, and I've literally passed that store like 7,000 times, never seen it, right? Now at hotels, I come kind of looking at little different details, and but it's amazing. I think just with these creative, people, the way they think, it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think within, because I really only know hospitality, but it's kind of interesting. If I were to use a hotel, there's always that battle between the engineers and the architects and the designers, right? Whereas I would think from oil and gas, really the engineers are kind of driving the bus, because like there's those structures and everything that you're building, there's such a cascading effect. If engineers are not in the front, bad things will happen. And whereas I love how in the hospitality world, it's really connecting all of those things, but also through a guest experience. I also appreciate how you say you're not good at that stuff, as far as what Carla came in and is helping you do, or all of the other creative energy that you're experiencing, from branding to architects, designers, landscape architects, F&B. But when it comes to you, Hector, and as far as the seat you're sitting in and the teams that you've become a part of and that you're growing, like, what do you think you're best at?
So yeah, I'm definitely not good at what we just talked about. I can come back to give you a very good example of that. I think what I'm best at, I'm very good at creating teams, right? I think I'm very good at kind of setting the stage to create a very good work culture and work environment. I think motivating people as well. And I would like to think that I'm also good at many times just getting out of the way, like even just earlier today, I was on a message with the guy that oversees development, and I was asking him on a couple of things. We're headed out to St. Thomas next week, and we're trying to meet with we're setting up a meeting on Friday to meet with the governor, because we're going to do a ground up development over there. And I was asking him, hey, have we done this? Have we done this? Have we done this? He's like, yep. And he's kind of giving me an update. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of just joking with them, but half serious. I'm like, okay, I'll just let you be. I'm going to go home and watch Netflix and just let you do your job.
Netflix and chill.
And I'm actually an engineer, right? So my background, I'm actually a mechanical engineer. I'd like to say I'm a recovering engineer. And I'm decent with numbers, right? You kind of have to be an engineer. So I'm good at problem solving and looking at things just analytically. And I feel like that's what I'm good at. I'll come back and I'll tell you a funny story,
Please.
A very funny story where I just know what I'm not good at, right? So this is in my own gas days, and it was two marketing people, two marketing ladies that, part of our division, and I was the vice president of North America at that point. This was a few years ago. And and we're in a meeting, and they set up a meeting so we could come up with a name for a really cool, innovative new drilling product that we had came up with. And as soon as I go in, I sit down in the meeting room and I look around, and I'm like, okay, hey ladies, how's it going? I'm like, Danny, I'm like, you're an engineer? I'm like, yeah. I'll say Keith, and Keith used to work with me. I'm like, hey, you're an engineer? I'm like, yeah. And then our president, I'm like, John, you're an engineer. And then we have actually the guy that's over engineering. I'm like, you're an engineer, I'm an engineer. And I look at I'm like, ladies, I said, if you think we're going to come up with anything good or productive out of this meeting with these group of people we have in this room, you're going to be disappointed. Like, we're not the right people. And they're like, no, it can't be that bad. So literally like 4 minutes into the conversation where we're coming up with names, right? And we're literally coming up with names that describe exactly what the thing is, which is not marketable. They finally look at me like, Hector, you're absolutely right. Like, you guys are, because I'm like, you have a bunch of engineers trying to come up with some creative, like that doesn't work.
So most of the audience that listens to this is like, it's a highly ranked design podcast on Apple Podcasts, but it tends to be more interior designers, architects, so more on that creative side, branding. Is there truth to what I said? I guess there is truth to what I said about that, the battle between engineering and creative, right? But they both need each other. What's the most surprising element of that, like, battle since switching over to hospitality for oil and gas? Battle / collaboration. Like, what are you surprised most about on the creative side, being an engineer and coming from oil and gas into hospitality?
I would say I'm probably most surprised, honestly, by outside interior design firms that we've had to use at times. And I say that I'm surprised, and I think it's just because here at Premier we're probably a little bit spoiled, at least looking at things from my perspective, is where I feel like many times there's not a huge regard to the budget. Right, to the budget. At the end of the day, I'm a businessman. We need to stick to a certain budget, and that is extremely important. And a lot of times when you work with these outside interior design firms, outside architecture firms, is they want to design this, and it's like, but the budget is this, right? And it's hard for them to contain that. I think that has probably been the biggest thing. And then I think as well is, I think one of the, but number one, I think you're absolutely right. There's always a battle, right? Even from an ownership standpoint, the engineer, the architect, and then the creative side. And even within our architecture team, we also have we have a design architect, right? A director of design architecture, which is also very on the creative side. I think that's probably been the biggest surprise to me, is just the disregard, and especially coming from oil and gas and coming from where everything is business, everything is numbers, everything is technical,
and a lot more zeros,
right? And a lot more zeros. Like, it's just, I would say that would probably be the biggest surprising to me, of the disconnect a lot of times from the budget to some of the creative side. I think on our side, because we're part of an ownership group, our team does that extremely well because they have to, right? And they've just been trained, and Carla has her team trained to think that way and to design to the budget. I think that's probably been the biggest disconnect.
Okay, fair enough. You went to University of Houston, which is why you were sharing with me, despite the Rangers winning and you're in Dallas, you're really a Houston Astros fan, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So at University of Houston, you studied engineering, right? If the Hector I'm speaking to right now, in your I want to try and come up with a word. You're a recovering engineer. Is that what you called yourself?
That's
okay. So you're an engineer in recovery. For your engineer in recovery that's been like baptized by this whole creative hospitality design world, and you were to magically appear in front of your engineering student self at University of Houston, what advice do you have for yourself?
I have no earthly idea what I would be telling myself. And I'll tell you why. I didn't set out to be an engineer.
Really? Why?
That wasn't.
What did you set out to be?
I love business. I love finance, numbers. I just realized when I started in oil and gas, I was getting my basics. And I realized very quickly, when they were hiring me, there was a bunch of people that came in and talked to us, all in management. Every single one of them were engineers. So I just realized very quickly in oil and gas, to your point earlier, the people that are going to make the decisions, the people that have mostly a future within the organization to continue to, get more responsibility, et cetera, they're all engineers. So at that moment, I made a decision like, well, I'm good in math. I've always been good at math. I'll just switch, right? And I'm good at remembering stuff. It'll be fine. So I made the decision to switch to engineering. So funny story is, as soon as I graduated, right? So I did what an engineer does probably 3.5, 4 years before I actually had an engineering degree. I was side by side with engineers doing design engineering, which is of course designing drilling tools, which is very different than what we design here. As soon as I graduated, they promoted me into management. I think they realized I sucked as an engineer and I was probably a lot better at managing people and getting things done through others. So I never, so then that brought me back to the business side very, very quickly.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Thank
So,
you. That's, I guess, yeah, it's like knowing your limits or actually being open-minded to others, seeing your strengths and weaknesses and go with your strengths is the moral of the story, I guess.
Yeah.
Hector, this has been a really enjoyable conversation, and it's been great getting to know you. And I look forward to getting to know you more over the years to come. If people wanted to learn more about you or Premier or Ashford, like what's a good way for them to connect?
Yeah. So they can go on our website, which is premierpm.com. And there's a questionnaire there as well as, and reach out to us through LinkedIn, right? Franklin Pinerua, he is our chief commercial officer.
Right.
Reach out to him. He's very, very responsive. Reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'm extremely responsive. And then we have an entire business development team as well that is very, very active on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. And we'll get all that into the show notes as well. And so this is a surprisingly wonderful conversation with you. And I want to say thank you to you for your time. I know how busy you are, but thank you from me and all of our listeners.
Thank you very much, Dan. It was definitely a pleasure, and I really enjoyed
Yeah,
this.
and thank you. And I want to also, I always love thanking our listeners because without you, we wouldn't be here right now learning from Hector's experience, which I think we all can learn from. All of these conversations we can learn from. So if this changed your way of how you see hospitality or design versus engineering or team building or just self-awareness in general, please pass it along. We've been growing every week still, and I'm humbled by that by word of mouth. So please spread the word. Thank you.